Hello and welcome to this CNBC Africa special. I'm Chris Bishop. It's the big question as the South African economy struggles through COVID-19. How many jobs will be left when the economy finally reopens? Predictions say thousands of companies will go into liquidation and as many as half of the country's scarce jobs will be lost. What can be done? Well, Sanlam has just launched a new fund to try to keep some of the country's jobs. And with me to talk about the problem and what they're trying to do about it is CEO of Sanlam Investments, Nersan Naidoo. Thank you very much for joining us. Just start off with, I mean, this problem, every company like yourself, from the Reserve Bank to yourself, they're all doing research and trying to predict what's going to happen. What's your view in your company?
Good afternoon, Chris, and thank you for having me on your show. So I think, like you correctly point out, there's a lot of research out there. There's a number of different perspectives on where we're going to end up at the end of this. I think if you look at our views internally and what maybe some of the private sector economists are saying is that we could see an economic contraction of about 10%. But I think the jobs point that you posed in your introduction there and the numbers around that that we're hearing, are you thinking or it sounds like we could be seeing something like 3 to 5 million job losses by the time we get to the other side of this. Are absolutely hair-raising numbers, and I think it's that concern around those jobs and the knock-on impact that the loss of those jobs will have. That's sort of behind our motivation to set these funds up.
And the question is, I mean, how much long-term damage? I mean, we were speaking to one of the major banks yesterday on Power Lunch, and I asked him how long do you think it's going to take, and he just shook his head and he said years. That's all I can say at the moment. What's your perspective at your company?
No, absolutely the same. I think it's very difficult to get your head around where and how we're going to end up out of this. I think you first got to try and figure out when do things go back to some sense of normality. Are we waiting then for more of a scenario where something like a vaccine has been distributed widely? Even if you think about the discussions that people have around how long it'll first take to find a vaccine, but then the challenge of distributing it globally to get it to everyone, that conversation sometimes runs into 3 or 4 years. Before you get into that scenario, it's difficult to imagine things ever getting back to any state of where they were previously. So when you think about economic recovery, I think this is definitely a multi-year problem, and one that we're going to have to have initiatives and structures like these funds that are going to be able to deploy capital over multiple years to help support companies to get through this.
We're going to talk a little bit about your fund in a moment, but I was just writing something last night saying that perhaps now's the time for the big companies in South Africa, the big corporates, to come to the party and open up their balance sheet and free up liquidity into the economy to try to help hang on to jobs. What's the feeling you're getting from your position, just looking around the economy on that score?
Yeah, so I'll start by answering that question with a slightly different angle. I think the one thing that's been happening in the world, for a while now, and probably getting more intense, or feeling the pressure build around it and growing, is the whole theme of sustainability. And what we as a world need to be doing to drive sustainability more, and who all the role players involved in that need to be. If you think about something like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Goals, I think provide a good blueprint and a framework for what needs to happen in the world to achieve a more sustainable outcome. And when you think about that, specifically what funding is required to achieve those goals, we are aware that the challenge is massive. There's still massive funding gaps in that. We have different financing structures like blended finance to try and help us bridge those gaps and mobilize capital into that space. When you look at something like COVID-19, I think what it's done is really amplified the spotlight on a sustainability problem. The challenge we're finding now is how do we keep businesses in South Africa and around the world more generally sustainable, so that we can preserve jobs, and in doing so contribute to those sustainable development goals. of reducing poverty, for instance, providing decent working conditions, promoting economic growth. And I think there's more awareness being built around this, more of the private sector becoming aware that we have a responsibility to actually contribute to this. So you asked the question, do I think we'll see more mobility of capital and similar initiatives around doing things like this? I think we absolutely have to. Um, we need an economy. We need a sustainable world at the end of this for us, for our children, and everybody needs to get on that bandwagon. And I think what we're seeing now is a spotlight that's been intensified on that, and a call to action from asset managers, the private sector in general, to be more involved in the solution.
And what about the mindset of shareholders here in South Africa? I recall back at the global financial crisis in 2008, a lot of shareholders were saying to me, oh, well, we'll do what we have to do to preserve our company and our assets, but wider than that, it's the government's problem, But it seems to me this COVID-19 is turning out to be everybody's problem.
I think it's one of those things that's touched every single person, right? I mean, it doesn't matter who you are and where you're sitting. You've felt the real effects of COVID-19. The fact that we're sitting here and having this conversation over Zoom, and I have most of my other meetings over Zoom. Everyone has felt the impact of this. Everyone can see what it's doing to the world, and the crisis creates alignment, and an alignment around a call for action. So I think if you think about that sustainability point again, historically, and maybe going back 10, 20 years, companies would have thought about it from the perspective of saying it's corporate philanthropy and something that we do, on the side, independent of our core business. I think where businesses have to get to now, and certainly it's the way we think about the world and where our business is going, is that sustainability and deploying capital and driving your business from a core purpose perspective has to resonate very strongly with sustainable outcomes. And I think that really, to your point, is where all corporates, shareholders, all stakeholders will have to start thinking about the way we do things and the way we conduct ourselves.
And moving to your funds now, you're putting up billions of rand to try to save companies and save jobs here. Just give us just a little taste of how it's going to work.
All right. So we've set up 3 funds. We're calling them the Investors Legacy Range, and we set up 3 funds because I think we recognize that there's a need for support. Firstly, through different financing structures, and secondly, in different parts of the economy. And so the first fund is going to be a senior debt fund, which will really be aimed at supporting mid and large corporates who are employing large numbers of people. The second fund will be an SME debt fund, which will provide loan financing into the SME space. And the third fund will be a private equity fund. So across the funds, we'll be able to provide either loan financing or equity investment. Sanlam recognizes the need to be aligned with our investors in this. We're going to put up 2.25 billion rand of our own capital to seed the funds. But obviously, we are aware that there are many other investors in the market, like-minded investors who are aligned to supporting the economy, to preserving jobs, to creating new jobs, and we want to mobilize them, alongside us into these funds. And we think, putting up the 2.25 billion rand of our own capital into seed them, it creates alignment with our fellow investors or the investment community. We're gonna divide that amongst the 3 funds. So 1 billion of that will go into the senior debt fund. 250 million rand of that will seed the SME debt fund, and then 1 billion of that will go into the private equity fund as well. And then we look to mobilize. I think based on what we think our pipelines look like now and how we can deploy capital, we'll aim to raise another 4.5 billion or so out of the market to get to a total size across the funds of about 7 billion rand. That's how we're thinking about it upfront.
Now, this is the latest in a quite a long line, thankfully, of funds to help business that have come out in the last few months, and it's laudable, and on any level you look at it. But are you not concerned, though, that we're still talking about debt, and a lot of companies are not going to be able to pay back that debt in the coming months when all of this is over, and you're going to get like this tidal wave of debt that's going to come into the system, and it could spell disaster for the economy, quite frankly.
Yeah, look, so debt is definitely, I think, a problem, more generally speaking. Unfortunately, and I suppose the risk of what you describe, companies' inability to service the debt at the end of this is probably one of the real material risks that investors will be worried about. These are not funds or initiatives that are set up, solely with the intent of just investing liquidity into companies without considering the financial return side of it, because we are aware institutional investors, for instance, in particular, alongside the mandate to want to contribute to economic recovery and sustainability, will also have investment objectives and financial return goals. So, in assessing the companies or the pipeline of companies that we would look to deploy capital into, one has to take a view of looking at them very much through the lens of trying to firstly get an understanding of, will these be sustainable businesses, post COVID-19, and be able to generate sustainable cash flows at the end of this, and therefore service the loans and the debt. And what can you do from an active engagement perspective with these businesses to help them actually get to the other side of this, and make sure they are sustainable. So I think in evaluating these, the pipeline of opportunities, one has to be very cognizant of deploying your capital first and foremost, and focusing first and foremost on those businesses where you have high conviction that you can get them through this, and end up in a position where they are sustainable and have sustainable cash flows at the end of the day.
And a point here I'd like your opinion on. I mean, earlier in Power Lunch, when we were live, we were speaking to one of the smaller lenders who was specializing in lending to small and medium enterprise business. And obviously, it's the last resort for a lot of people who can't get loans out of the big banks. But he was putting forward the theory that soon you may not even be able to get debt in the system. I mean, how likely is that, do you think?
Now, look, I think I really do believe that we'll get a mobility of support around these initiatives. I think your earlier point that this is another in a line of them that have come to market already, I think speaks loudly to the fact that the private sector in particular recognizes that we have to step up, we have to contribute and play a role in this. And I expect that there'll be more of these initiatives from other providers in the market coming forward, to ensure that we give ourselves the best chance of actually getting through this, and supporting as many businesses as possible, preserving as many jobs as possible, and at the end of it, injecting growth capital so that we can get growth or new jobs, create new jobs out of it as well.
And lastly, very briefly, Nersan, I mean, I'm asking a lot of people this final question on a lot of occasions these days. As a journalist, I think balance is important. Just give us something of hope that we can look forward to in the rest of a very difficult 2020, please.
Look, well, I would say hope. A company like Sanlam has stood up, put a significant commitment into this. If you think about the numbers that we're talking about in terms of what we'll need, it's not an insignificant number. I'm glad to see that some of the other businesses, some of the businesses that would be traditionally regarded as our competitors, are doing the same. We're all mobilizing our efforts to help. We have sincere intent here of helping the economy, of helping people. Every job counts. We want to try and help as many people as we can to keep their jobs, and we want to contribute to a sustainable recovery for South Africa out of this. And for me, I think to everyone who's watching and listening, to see big businesses step up in this way should provide a lot of hope, and I'm looking forward to more of them coming to the party going forward.
Well, best of luck indeed with that. That was Nersan Naidoo, the CEO of Sanlam Investments, talking there on new funds that maybe can save some of the jobs that are going to be lost. That's apparently going to run into the millions. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this CNBC Africa special. From myself, Chris Bishop, and the team, it's goodbye.